call the Development Committee meeting to order. Kathy, would you take a quick roll, please?
Carter,
Here.
Hicken,
Here.
Walther,
Here.
Okay, stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, since this is our first Development Committee meeting of the year, it's probably a good idea to start off and just let the administration give us the updates, and then we can ask questions from there. It seems like 30 minutes is never enough for this meeting, just because of the content. So if you want to go ahead, BJ, and you guys can take it, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure thing. Gave each of you an agenda of what we wanted to cover, and I talked to Mel about this when we did the purpose as well. Several items that we want to provide an update on and also get feedback on. We had talked about a fee in lieu of sidewalk construction in the past, looking at area, our subdivision regulations, development regulations require the construction of sidewalks, but there are areas where right now they just don't make sense, and we would like to create a process where we could have a fee in lieu of paid, and then the city, that would go into an account, and the city would have the ability to utilize that to fill gaps essentially for sidewalks. We currently have something like that in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's called like an environmental
Ecological
or
preservation.
ecological, which is essentially if people don't want to put trees in, they can pay us money to not put the trees in. And this would be similar to that, where we would have it and would be able to utilize it then for sidewalks, trails, wayfinding, whatever that we saw necessary as far as filling gaps and connecting systems instead of having just these areas where there aren't sidewalks. A good one that comes into mind is AEP along Etna Parkway. You put in a sidewalk, first of all, would be in what is dedicated right-of-way right now and could one day be removed from that. I'm in favor of it. I think it could be very beneficial as we look at areas where the pedestrian access is dangerous right now. The city doesn't necessarily have money budgeted to address those, and this would be a way to get money to be able to start addressing some of those issues. I believe Scott had provided to the committee in their packet draft ordinances, Scott, and if you want to, I'll let you go ahead and take it from there then and talk them through.
Thank you, BJ. There are two draft ordinances in the packet. The first one is the one that has the yellow highlighting on it. Essentially what that does is amend the code to establish the call for the creation of the fund. In looking through the code, when the Ecological Preservation Fund was established maybe 12 years ago, there's a section of the code that says that contributing to a fund in lieu of planting the trees can be created. So we modeled this on that, where it calls for the creation of the fund. Also, it establishes how the implementation of the fund will go. The second ordinance, which is in black and white, essentially is just the language to formally establish the fund. So how we've worked out how the fund would work is that the city administrator, their designee, could waive the requirement to install the sidewalk if the city administrator, their designee, determines that installation of the sidewalk at that location essentially doesn't make sense. So it would be a sidewalk to nowhere. So if that determination is made, the developer will be required to submit a payment in lieu of installing that sidewalk. What would happen is they would get a construction estimate together, submit that to the city administrator or their designee. They would take a look at it to see if that makes sense. And then if it's determined to be accurate, the developer would submit a check to the city to be deposited in that fund to be used later for a number of things: sidewalks, crosswalks, striping, street furniture, certain things that would go along a sidewalk or pathway system. All those, that fund could be used for that. And we did look at other cities, the way they did it, but they had a formula in place that with asphalt and price fluctuations, the inflation, certain things that if it's based upon a dollar amount, in 10 years that dollar amount might not be relevant. So we wanted to have the flexibility that it's based on today's estimate, and then the city will check that estimate to make sure that it's accurate.
Okay. You have quick, go ahead, Andy.
Couple questions for you. I just reading your red line real quick, and again, this is 30 seconds. You have a 4-foot wide sidewalk. Is there any fluctuation in that? Do you anticipate any fluctuation in the width? For instance, possibly at the AEP site, they may have a 5-foot sidewalk required in a commercial area versus a residential area being a 4-foot side. You're pinning yourself down to a 4-foot wide sidewalk. Is that?
That's in the code today, so it wasn't thrown out there to be changed. Some of what we're looking to do on the major arterials is to do a pathway instead of a sidewalk.
For instance, Columbus has gone to a 10-foot side, or 10-foot asphalt path.
Right.
They've gone from an 8 to a 10. I'm just wondering if putting an actual width in the ordinance, as you said, to be flexible, maybe it's whatever the city's development plan calls for at that point in time.
My only concern with that is if we start to fluctuate back and forth, then we're going to have sidewalks and paths kind of doing this. So trying to standardize it in some way will keep things consistent. Also, I know with speaking with developers, they like to know kind of the rules ahead of time. So what are you expecting me to do? So if we throw out a number or a width, they can say, where'd you get that?
Right. I'm just saying if you decide, if it was decided in front of AEP, for instance, under their development plan, that they have to have a 5-foot wide sidewalk. Well, this is conflicting with that versus a 4-foot wide pay in lieu of 4-foot wide is specified in here. That's all.
I agree, and I think on some of the major arterials, Broad, 310, perhaps Etna Parkway, that we would go with 8-foot paths instead of
8-foot
sidewalks.
asphalt path.
8-foot asphalt path, yeah, and that's what I anticipate areas like that, those types of roads would have the path.
I guess I'm just wondering if you really want to put an actual number in here, rather than just saying whatever the current, you come in for your plan, payment in lieu of, whatever the city's requirement is that day,
Current standard.
2027, maybe it's gold paths by then, I don't know, maybe something, but some kind of, here's what it's got to be, but it's not, by putting 4-foot in the ordinance, we'd have to change the ordinance to update that to whatever the city's requirement would be.
We would, but personally, I feel comfortable having a determination in terms of the widths of the paths. That if we do come later and say we're switching this up, it's simply changing a number in the code to reflect the changes within the city rather than having that amount of flexibility.
And if we go current standard, that's what the code's, so if the code
Right,
changes.
code standard, right.
Right,
That's
but
what I'm saying.
that current standard would need to be changed in the code anyways, because the code has current standards in it.
You gotta change two things.
Right.
If you have this reference back to current standard, then you're only changing one. That's all. Can I ask another question? Is this, for the cost in lieu of, is it public cost versus a private cost? Which, are they paying prevailing wage to the city, or are they paying a private cost to the city?
It would be private cost.
Okay, so essentially, if in lieu of 100 feet of sidewalk, for instance, and we come back in and put it in, we're only going to be able to put in 85% or 85 feet of that sidewalk for that same price, because essentially 15%.
They'd be paying us equal to what they would cost them to install it.
for what they would have to pay.
Correct.
Okay, one last item. Is that including all crosswalks, handicap ramps?
Whatever,
and
yeah.
Whatever's
I'm
included?
sorry.
Because if a development went in, arguably, I don't know that we can require them to put in crosswalks. It could be part of a condition, but the fee in lieu would be just for the sidewalk or path portion.
In signage, in the warrant, the notice signage.
Yeah, and things like that, but the fund, if established, would be available to be applied towards signage, crosswalks, things of that nature that we can
I guess what I'm asking, Scott, is if you're not going to put the sidewalk in, then do you need the crosswalk? And if you're not going to put the crosswalk in, do you need the signage? Someday, that sidewalk's going to be put in, we're thinking. So you're going to need the crosswalk, and therefore you're going to need the signage also, and they didn't pay for that. That's where I'm getting to.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I would expect is that they would be responsible for paying it for any pedestrian access.
All
That,
of the above.
that would be required if they weren't paying the fee in lieu of.
Okay. I just want to
Does that
make
make
sure it's
sense?
covered in this,
Yeah.
in this
'Cause
ordinance,
some-
that they're paying for everything that would have been included.
They can make they could either go ahead and pay to have it in, which may not make sense at the time.
Right.
or they would pay to cover the costs. You know, if those are ped heads or if those are crossings or whatever would be triggered and required for pedestrian access for their
just wanna make
development would
sure
be
that
required
That's
to be
noted
paid.
in there that
You
they,
got it.
that they gotta pay it.
Yeah.
I don't want the city to lose out on it, basically.
Mr. Hicken, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my first question is, especially since I know during the street committee meeting tonight, I intend to talk a little bit about some crosswalks that I think are necessary. How many places do you guys currently think this type of a situation exists? I mean, are we specifically talking about the newly developed areas, or are you talking about areas that, you know, obviously a subdivision would not be doing this, right?
Correct.
Because we want a sidewalk in a subdivision.
Correct.
So how much do you think we're ultimately going to, and which areas of the city are ripest, if that's the right word? Do you have any feel yet for how many different places?
Off the top of my head, I know the Kroger site is usually something that when we discuss this comes to mind because you see people walking along the street there. That would be something that we could potentially apply it to.
That's where we would apply it to.
You're saying where would we be able to collect it from?
Yes.
As you see some things as you go down Broad Street, that there might be nothing next to them, that they could install it. There was one on Taylor Road.
That's what I was gonna actually bring up.
Yes, that would be the perfect example that they installed the path, but it goes nowhere.
It's just,
And I know a path is coming down the opposite side of Taylor Road, so that would be the perfect example to say, this doesn't make sense for you to install it, so we could use the money elsewhere in the city.
it looks beautiful, but
In,
Maybe
by the-
310, or some area, I can understand that.
Yeah,
Okay.
310, and if you look at, using Taylor, by the time that other paths may be there to match up with it, that portion may be deteriorated to the point that need to be replaced anyways, and that would be on the city's dime then,
And
because we've
another-
accepted it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the idea. I'm just trying to get a feel for, should we expect this to be successful in the realm of a lot of stuff in the near future coming into the fund?
I could see that happening quite a bit, because as things develop on major corridors, 310, Broad, things like that they might not be next to something, I think it makes more sense to put that into the fund. And then I could see it being implemented that there's Hazelton Crossing at the corner of 310 and Refugee, the northeast corner. So as that develops,
Gotcha.
subdivision, some commercial, they'll have to put in the path. But as you go north, there's that subdivision there. But that's not redeveloping anytime soon. So as 310 develops north, you're going to have that, gap in the path that this fund could be allocated then to fill in that gap. And that makes the entire path system much more functional instead of path, nothing, and then path again. So it would fill in some of those gaps.
Good. That answers my question.
Process forward, I would like to, unless we hear otherwise from the committee tonight, I would like to start moving this forward. First meeting in March for a first reading of the ordinances.
I think that's a great idea. Actually, that's what I was about to ask you is how quickly do you think this is gonna come forward based on, current things that are in the works for development? And it came to mind the first time we talked about this last year too, is just, so this is a special fund set completely aside. The money cannot be touched for anything else.
Correct.
Okay, because
Correct.
that would be okay,
Only pedestrian access facilities, I guess we can call them.
okay.
So we would have to, I believe we'd have to advertise it for 30 days before we could do a public hearing. So we can get that information to Kathy as soon as possible, then it just comes down to scheduling that public hearing.
Is this something that you want to wait on the codification for?
Yes. We may, change is coming down, we may just have to go with it, but yes, I would like to.
Okay. All right, you can keep it moving, BJ. The subdivision regulation update. Scott?
So that was on the big list that we had probably about a year ago. So we've been working on this for about 2 months. And since Alan has come on board and he's been more active in the development process with subdivisions, it's come to light that we have a lot of gaps in there and some things are getting through that we don't want to get through anymore. So if they continue to develop, we want to make sure that things are shored up and that we have a clear lineal development process. At this point, there's too many options as you move through it that it'd be easier for everyone involved if you do A, and once A is done, you move on to B. So there's certain things in here that we're going through our subdivision regulations, we're looking at Licking counties, we're looking at others, and finding ways that we can incorporate some of those ideas from other places that we've seen and use them in ours to create this process that will address things in a more efficient way. Because in the past, what we're looking to do is provide safeguards to the city that ensure that the subdivisions are constructed correctly. In the past, we've had roads and other improvements that have not been installed correctly, or if at all. We have one subdivision that, going through the old files, you look and you're saying, oh, you were supposed to put in a turn lane here, and that was 10 years ago. What happened? So we want to make sure that there's not that confusion that as we move through everything, you check the box, you move on to the next. Also, that we've seen some issues come up with some of the subdivisions where homes are being constructed on streets that have not been accepted by the city. So that creates an issue because it's not a public street, but now there's houses being constructed on it. We don't want to see that happen anymore. So as we establish this the timeline that everything we don't miss anything. Also, there's some sections that things come up in the subdivision process that our code has not addressed. So this would be plan amendments, expiration dates, which is very important because right now if you do a final development plan, there's no expiration date. So what we're running into is folks that have done a plan 10, 15 years ago that they're dusting it off and saying, I want to build this, but there's certain things that they don't make sense anymore. So we want to establish a time frame that it expires, but that you have the ability to extend the validity of that plan through Planning and Zoning Commission. So establish a clear path to how these things would work. Also, replats. If you're adjusting a lot line in a subdivision, the code says you have to go through Planning and Zoning Commission, but that's all it says. So we want to flesh that out to say, here's how the process will work. So a lot of those things, we're filling in gaps. We're trying to make it a clearer lineal process. And as we do it, we want to make sure there's safeguards for the city, that everything is done correctly. But at the same time, we're looking at the opposite side, that we don't want to overburden the developer. So we want to try and find that middle ground that the city's covered, but it provides a streamlined, clear-cut plan for them to go from start to finish without the confusion that we're currently seeing. So we've been doing it 2 months. Based upon our estimate, we said about 6 months, but at this point, I think we're, if not on schedule, probably a little bit ahead of schedule in us revising those. So once we get those revised, we'll get those vetted through legal counsel and then start the adoption process.
And that'll come to us first? Or,
Yeah, I think it would come to Development Committee, and then once we get the okay, we take it over to Planning Commission and then on up the ladder.
Yeah, items like this, I like to get recommendations from the committees so it can be vetted through and questions answered at this level, and then get a recommendation one way or another from the committee, because I think that goes a long way with council considering it.
Agreed. Okay. Comprehensive plan update?
We have started working on the comprehensive plan, some of the things that don't involve public input, demographics, history, introduction, some general things that are just factual based that we're gathering information on and starting to draft those sections of the plan. And Zach's been working on this, so I don't want to.
Yeah, sure. So currently we have community services descriptions, which is just basic information about City Hall, Fire Department, Police Department, school districts. Those include just descriptions and brief history of each department. We also have demographics on Columbus, Pataskala, and Licking County as a way to compare the three of them and see how they stack up against each other. Those demographics include the population, income, education, things of that sort. We also have a history of the city and a section about the purpose of the comprehensive plan. And I'm also working of a template, so once we have that together, it'll be 3 times easier to just drag and drop in the information without formatting. So.
And then typically with a comprehensive plan, there's a steering committee that's formulated as we work through the plan that works with staff. So I don't know, from what I understand, Planning Commission served as a steering committee 10 years ago. I don't know if this would be Development Committee, Planning Commission, a combination thereof. A lot of times I've seen local residents or business owners involved in this, so that would probably need to be established before we begin kind of the public process, drafting a survey, starting doing meetings, things like that. So that would be some direction that we would seek, that we can kind of get that lined up, so when we're subdivision regulations are in the approval process, we can shift gears and focus on the comprehensive plan. We can already kind of have that set up.
Scott, there's been talk of our current comprehensive plan. So are you guys revising and updating and just going through each part, or are you completely redoing it?
I think it would be best, in my opinion, that we kind of just completely redo some of it. I think it can be expanded in the sense that we can speak with public services about some of the goals and objectives of the public service department. Talk to Nate in the utility department. What are your goals and objectives? And make it more of a city plan, so that when we meet with developers, they're looking at a particular property. The planning department knows what everyone else is thinking about that, so we can be upfront with everything and say, utilities, this is what you need to do for this. For streets, this is what you'll need to do with this. We can talk to parks. So I think we can take it from just a comprehensive plan more to a city plan that we include more departments and agencies and see what their direction they want to go. So then it's everybody's kind of on the same page, which is what we've been working with in the planning department to get everybody involved. So when we meet with developers, we know we have as much information as possible.
Well, and I think, I mean, obviously, because we're changing dramatically from year to year, even the city and how it's shaped. But I would hate to see you guys not utilize the information from the comprehensive plan just for the historical value of it, based on how the city even came together to begin with. And I know you guys are probably more familiar with the plan than I am, but I'm just thinking of, you know, if when you start looking at school districts and things of that nature, it helps to see what the plan was before, if you will, to make sure that there's not something like, oh, they were along those lines. I see where they were going. Just to keeping an open mind for the whole thing.
I completely agree, and it's one of those that you can't just say this is completely irrelevant, we're starting all over. I think looking at the history that the old one has and transitioning that into the new one, because I'm sure there's a lot. I know there's a lot of ideas that were in the 2006 ones that would still be applicable today.
Absolutely.
I think some things that we could probably update, but I think using the resources we have and applying it to the new comprehensive plan is something that we would do.
And from a land use aspect, comprehensive plans in large part are for land use, and I see a lot of that carrying over from 06 as you look, I'll say north of Broad Street, as you start looking at agricultural land and all of that stuff, that's stuff that I think a lot of it's going to be preserved for many years to come. I mean, if that started to develop, we wouldn't have the infrastructure to be able to support it right now. So I see a lot of that stuff carrying over, but looking at some of the targeted areas that we're seeing development and revamping, as Scott said, those areas.
Yeah, it's got a couple different things. I think the existing comprehensive plan does not take into concern some things that we are now concerned about. For instance, I think I saw in Nate's utility report the protected watershed or the drinking water area. The current comprehensive plan has nothing in it for that. So there are things that certainly need to be included so that development and developers know, and owners of those properties know that this is a protected, quasi-protected area for certain uses due to the water quality and the water, drinking water ability. So that, I think there are a lot of different things that, from historical viewpoints, weren't included in the existing comprehensive plan that we, meaning the city, and I think your approach is correct with having utilities, having Alan involved in it, having Nate certainly a big part of it, you guys being a big part of it, even the police department to talk about coverages for coverage for the police as far as they're concerned, to be a part of it. What are you thinking about this being so? Who's going to spearhead this? Who, in your mind, how does this get spearheaded? Who's the champion? Who's the person that's taking us through the process?
I could see it twofold. I could see that we come to the steering committee and say, here are the ideas. We have option A, B, or C. Which one do we like? Which one do we want to take forward and moving from there? So it would be, I could see the planning and zoning department coming up with, we have options, and then the steering committee doing the guiding in terms of which option we take. So I think it would be a twofold process.
Okay, I kind of see it a little differently. I see it like the charter review. You know, taking apart the existing plan and looking back at history and bringing in who. I'm not saying that you guys would do that necessarily, but a committee of some type would take that apart and then look at each piece, bring in who is necessary, whether it be Alan about roadways or Nate about utilities or whatever, and really working through those items. Your particular group about setbacks and sidewalk requirements. Let's just use that as an example. You know, those kind of discussions are included in a comprehensive plan. So I think that would be an important way to do this in a manner that everybody would understand. And for that matter, the mayor could be brought in to talk about, community event areas. I mean, we don't have any community event areas designated in the comprehensive plan, quite frankly.
We do not.
So, I mean, those are things that are in current comprehensive plans. When you look at different cities that are putting together comprehensive plans today, they're concerned about those types of things, and we should be certainly acknowledging that.
I agree, and that would be the thing that I think we would spearhead. We need to talk about community areas. So then we could go and discuss things with the mayor. We could bring the information back. We can do some of those things that when we meet with the steering committee, it's not just, here's all the information, now let's sit here and try and figure out and put it together. I think we can take that information, summarize it, and present it to them and say, knowing what we know, here are some options, what should we do? So that way we can provide the guidance and they can give us the feedback. So it's a give and take thing. Because I've seen my reluctance to just go and say, here's all the information, is I find that those meetings become disorganized and things kind of go off in multiple different directions. I think we can help streamline and focus the process, but we need the feedback from those community residents to say, here's what we think, knowing what we know.
Okay. Can we get a quick, because we've run out of time by when we blink in this committee, a quick update on the zoning map, since you've put it in front of us.
Yes, that zoning map is accurate to the best of our knowledge at this date. We do have the one rezoning on its third reading on schools tonight, so arguably tonight or in 30 days from tonight, it will be, it will need to be updated.
It'd be
again.
different, okay.
And we also have a public hearing for another rezoning tonight. But as far as that, we think we have a handle on everything that we've kind of gone through. Knock on wood, there should be no surprises where things were rezoned in 91 and not reflected. But as far as we know, that's accurate.
If I can real quick, this is based on a lot of information and research their department did looking at past rezonings that were approved, but the map was never changed. This addresses the split zoning issues that we had. So moving forward, this is an accurate representation of the city's zoning, which is the first time we've had an accurate, I'll say, zoning map in many years.
Okay.
And there's still some split zoning throughout the city that we will need to address, but the split zoning is accurate in terms of that. It's accurately reflected on the map, but that's something that in the future we'll need to address.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, right now, are we the only people that have seen this? Is this map currently on the city's website?
I don't believe this one has been uploaded to the
This
site.
is not on the city's website.
Is there a plan to do that?
Yes.
And then,
We're also working on updating applications and uploading those to the website as well. So once we get all those completely finished, then we'll take that and the map and put it on the site.
okay.
Okay. Briefly, before we adjourn, I just want to give you guys, I feel like, because we're already into like the second meeting in February, that we've lost some ground, just based on everything that's going on. So I'd like to give you guys an idea of what I would like to see at the upcoming meeting, that I'd like to do possibly at the very next meeting, if possible, next council meeting. An update on the outline of your job responsibilities and how things are shaping in your department now that you have Zach. So we can see where you've come on some of those projects and the timeline on those. I'd also like to see an outline of what we have now coming into the city, like what new developments, AEP, anything else that you may see. And specifically, I'd like to see if there's been any interest in the Broad and Summit intersection, or if there's been any progress in that area.
Last I've heard that we haven't heard anything on that, unless BJ's heard something.
And I don't know if we want to keep going and,
I think the
Yeah.
street committee is going to be kind of short, to be honest with you. So
Yeah.
if we can go, because I've got a couple just some
yeah.
overall
Okay.
questions to ask.
Thanks, Scott. Summit and Broad. I talked to Connie Klima. They are trying to revive the project. She's working with, Coughlin on that, and she is having issues with communication with him. They do have a sign-up marketing one aspect of it, and I keep putting a bug in her ear about the TIF that we talked about for the improvements to the intersection. And I know she has a lot going on as well.
Okay.
So, well, we'll continue to pursue with Connie on that.
Just one quick question. The auto parts, or the auto mechanic down here on Broad Street. I notice he's got a sign up. He's doing business again. He's got cars out front. I mean, is he meeting all of your expectations as far as any of his conditional use criteria that he had to do at that point? Specifically, I remember a fence or at least tree planting that had to occur. Don't see that yet, so I'm just wondering where you guys are with them.
What we did is gave them conditional approval to open, just because they had to put in fence, trees, things like that. When they opened, it was the middle of winter, so we said, you're not gonna plant trees right now, so we'll do a conditional approval based upon these have to be planted by,
End of March or April, I have to check the calendar, but.
Okay.
so we've established that you have until this, and then if you don't, now we're in violation. So we tried to give them some leeway,
I know it's in
to allow them to open,
Seems
to
like we're
generate
repeating
some money, so
It's
if
like
they need the
Groundhog
money
Sure.
to install the trees, install the fence, we wanted to be reasonable, but we are gonna hold them to the conditions of approval.
And again, are you requiring them not to park cars out front of the building, or are they allowed to do that this time?
They have to park in designated parking spots.
And have they designated parking spots? Because
They
I
haven't been able to
I didn't see
stripe
any,
due
yeah.
to the,
okay.
so the striping will come.
What I don't want to do is we were pretty hard on the last group, and what looks like we're doing from a guy just driving by. If I were the person that got booted out of there, I'd be pretty upset. So I'm just keeping everybody, making sure we know that. I don't want to get us in trouble.
The trees, the fence, the striping, we were waiting until warmer weather
Okay.
so they could, be
Okay.
reasonable and make sure we had a timeline for them to do that in.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if the Madam Chairperson had anything else to list that she wants to hear for the upcoming meeting. I would just put my 2 cents in that I feel like the actual work moving forward on the formation of the steering committee for the comprehensive plan update should definitely be on there, because I feel like we talked about it a little bit, but time didn't allow us to talk about everything from membership to the drive on that committee. And then the other thing I was going to mention, and I didn't because of time, but is the fee in lieu of sidewalks. We want that to according to Mr. King, have its first reading in March, is that correct?
Well, I misspoke because we've got to advertise it, and I forgot about the 30-day advertisement for it, but, you know, if we could go ahead and advertise the public hearing, we could have it potentially, well, we wouldn't even meet.
End of March, more first of April.
I want to move it ahead as quickly as the scheduling process allows.
And I guess what I was going to say is, at some point, I know that making sure that gets to council as a whole, I'm sure that, so it doesn't just pop up right at the first, because the concerns of Mr. Walters alone kind of makes me want to dive into that red line, but I really haven't had a chance to do it yet.
What I plan on doing is getting the public hearing scheduled, but then also providing it with an outline to council in the next council packet.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else you guys think we need tonight?
I can just mention one more thing. They're meeting in March, and sorry if you were going to mention this, but Brian Zetz is going to hold a training session with the BZA on what their role is, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. Since we have one new member, and we're probably going to have another new member, we have a new chair, and Scott has scheduled that so they know what their role is and what their positions are.
When is that?
When's their first meeting?
14th is when that will be. So we will have, if the new members selected for BZA tonight, Mr. Platt's new. Last year, Ms. Rodeback was new. So this way, we'll have 3 new people and, you know, just a refresher course for the other 2 folks. So I think it'll be good just to say, here's kind of how this works.
Okay.
Will you advertise that to the council?
Just outlines their roles and responsibilities, their parameters.
It's here, like, there's a list of requirements that you need to meet to approve variance, go over what it means to have a hardship, some of those things.
Okay.
Because there's been some variances that were granted where if you're allowed X square feet for an accessory building, we're like 120% greater than that. So just going through and expressing, here's what a hardship is, that,
Essentially, not everything's a hardship.
yes.
Okay. All right. Like we flew through that. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Yeah. Second.
Carter,
Yes.
Higgin,
Yes.
Walters?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. Sorry, that was like,
A lot of stuff for
I
half hour.
feel, it feels like we need at minimum an hour.
I
feel like
I think they need to be.